Testing, testing, 1, 2. All right, we're good. Testing, testing, 1, 2. I think yesterday I was a little farther away. We can't be like this or we're going to get a lot of popping sounds. So we're going to be half and half. We're going to be like right there. We're going to see how this sounds. We're testing. The first week is testing our system, our production studio. Thank you, anonymous donor, for helping me out with the production studio. And the first week is somewhat of a success because we have a couple views, a little bit of feedback on how I sound like. The best feedback so far was that it looks like I'm on a hostage in some sort of underground bunker, which is kind of halfway true. And then the first week we have a workflow of how long this is going to take, whether I can commit to it daily, because if you want a podcast, you definitely want to commit daily. I feel good. I feel like this is a good job I could commit to for a couple months until we get a budget. The goal, let me explain a little bit the overall goal of this, is to run for Congress, right? And that's why you start your goals before you're even sure what you're doing, because your first assumptions are usually wrong. So I'm like, I want to run for the 20th congressional district. And then in my networking and talking to people and putting together a team and advisors, and there's this really nice I'm trying to say it politely, but she's an elderly lady, but she's very sweet. She's been in politics for a while. She cares a lot about the environment in Santa Cruz. I just ran into her. I run into people for some reason. You put out a vibe, you get a vibe. And she had in her updates, email updates, reminded me that we just had a census. We don't even know what the congressional districts are going to be. Probably is not going to be the 20th. So if I want to run for Santa Cruz, Big Sur and Santa Cruz might not even be in the same congressional district. They're cutting up the maps in California. So it's Shaz 420 probably isn't going to be the brand. Might be like 417, 427, who knows? So you have to be humble when you do stuff like this, iterate and take in the new information, and then and go from there. The deadline for that's December 27th. So we'll run this for the next 2 months. Good practice for me to, I've done this a couple times. First time I did this was 2020, January. I had a hostel, Puerto Rico. Intuitively, I've been, that's why if you look at the description below, it's a little bit of a recap of Shaz's approach to getting into politics. But I've spent a couple of years brainstorming this. And during that time, when I stopped real estate in Manhattan, I've done a couple other things because I did not save any of that Manhattan money. And I made $500,000 in real estate, and I lived very well, just to dust the poverty off of me, but didn't really stack up. And I have opinions of that, but my life story and my preparation to this point is going to go into a book, which we're pitching. That's going to be grapefruit or along the way. After that book, which catches us up to the present, I'm going to write another book about my political theory and what's going on in the world, why I think I can save the world. It's not an egomaniac thing, because it's not like personally I'm going to run around and martyr myself or save the world, but it's just a framing of the discussion that we are facing existential crises and we're not going to tiptoe around it. The world is in need of quick, decisive action, or else this is how the civilization, no, not even civilization, I won't call what we have right now civilization. This is how the human story is going to end. If I put myself in a life or death situation, or most people, there'll be an instinct to preserve yourself, self-preservation instinct. We all have that. When it fails, that's maladaptive behavior against self. That is when we look at suicidals, depressives, and that's why it's such a big deal, because your life-saving instinct is failing. You're no longer eating. Oh my gosh. When you go through heartbreak, my relationship, which we're going to put into the story that covers the last 4 years, I had to, not that I had to, like I had choice, but my relationship ended that I was in for a couple of years. And I wasn't eating for a while. I dropped like 15 pounds. So heartbreak definitely messes with that life or death, that inner survival instinct. A couple other things do stress, right? There's a lot more suicides now, military members, others. So we talk about that. We're going to talk about that. But I do believe my instinct to do this, and others out there to do something different, comes from a life or death instinct as a collective whole of humanity. that we're noticing that the story of human beings could end. We knew that when we invented the nuclear weapon and then they proliferated, that these are actions which can end all of human life on the earth. And we're only increasing those actions. A war is the biggest danger to that. That's why we start with peace. That's why we say that first and foremost, people say climate, climate, climate. You know, the climate didn't invade Iraq. The climate isn't destabilizing the Middle East and Africa. The climate isn't threatening China as much as the American military empire. So we are stuck in some behavior patterns, which are what do you call it? There's a word for this in psychology, but they reinforce themselves, reinforcing behavior. An orgasm is the easiest, quickest example. Is that you feel pleasure, you do more, you feel more pleasure, you do more until you ejaculate or orgasm. Um, birth is another one. Contractions continue until out comes the baby. It's that simple, right, ladies? So there are actions that reinforce each other up to a climax point or up to, and that is what we are in reinforcing behavior as far as our warmongering. We're only empowering more authority into concentrated individuals who I believe you can diagnose it probably. I'm not the clinician to diagnose it, but maladaptive behavior at the top. These people are obsessed with war, obsessed with profits, obsessed with control, and their path only leads in death and destruction for us and themselves. I mean, look at here's an example of that. Look at our prison system in America. It is criminogenic. This is well documented. Criminogenic means creates crime. So by putting people in prison, we create more criminals. It's been well documented. People go to prison and it becomes a graduate school for crime. You come out as a better criminal with more connections and more of a, they call it institutional mind state. I have a buddy who just got out here in California, and I got firsthand experience of that. That goes into the book about my last couple of years, about someone whose mind state, I grew up with this kid. When you get out of prison, it's more institutional. Some of the ideas in his head are kind of funny now, some of his behavior. So we have that in our prison system. We have that in our military and our military leaders, that they only think in warfare, and therefore they create more and more warfare. And they're only more and more empowered over the last, at least my lifetime. George Bush, 9/11. Before 9/11, they had the Project for a New American Century. Said we need a 9/11 type event. They didn't say 9/11 type event. We need a disaster as an excuse to push our warfare into the Middle East, and then they got it. So who's to say? And that's where 9/11 conspiracies, they say. They knew it was going to happen. They collaborated, conspired, or even did it. But whether you think they knew it was going to happen or whether you think they were collaborators in 9/11 happening, we all know they took advantage of the fact. And that is a pattern that is well documented, whether you believe in conspiracies or not, is that our leaders take advantage of tragedy to advance their agenda, and their agenda is warfare and global control. You can't control the globe no matter how much technology you have. Therefore, you're going to create a system in which you push for more control and then the system breaks. A very good example of that is if I have a thermostat and I'm trying to keep it at 75.97 degrees, I'll break the system because the system cannot adjust that minutely. So you'll turn it up a little bit, you'll turn it down a little bit, you'll turn it up a little bit, you'll turn it down a little bit. It's weather. We cannot predict the weather more than like a week out, 10 days out. No matter how much computing power we throw at it, people have pretty much given up on predicting I could look up right now weather prediction for 2 months out, a year out. But after so much time, it becomes uh, the probability of me being accurate becomes statistically insignificant, other than normal historic patterns that I'm looking at. And even then, with climate change, that's throwing that all off. So systems, and this is the beauty of life. This is why Zuckerberg, people who want to replicate life within a metaverse, is the complexity of life is so beautiful that it scales up exponentially, fractally, faster than you can measure it, control it, this or that. And so those who only believe in authority and control, which is maladaptive, they only believe in defining the world through control. The world is a greater energy system than you. And so those people, that's actually neurosis, right? Neurosis, people who try to control too much. Me trying to go to the ocean, hold back the waves, trying to adjust the weather or predict the weather more than rational. And I would put in that same category our military leaders who really believe, and this is at the top. I've documented it the last couple of years. The ideas, any idea I have, I've documented, and that's why I spent the last couple of years documenting my ideas, comparing them against reality. What we're doing with this podcast right now, documenting the newspaper of reality, the newspaper of record, comparing it to objective reality. So we're going to use some other sources to define what that objective reality is, and then we're going to look at the newspaper and say, are you really describing objective reality? Are you just pushing narratives? And are those narratives coming from these maladaptive sources, these people who have bad ideas because of trauma and because of bias, grow up in the society? And I've documented that too. Where do these ideas come from? These people, most of the leaders, most of the elites, come up through very insular, nasty educational systems. So we're going to talk about that, the education of the elites, the education of those who aren't elites but are matriculated through their systems. I have friends who've gone to Harvard, friends with PhDs. Why are they watching these Marvel movies? Why are they ingesting these narratives? What are their biases that they've accumulated through these institutions of power? And everyone, I just described this over 10 minutes, but everyone kind of knows we're on this path. We could feel it. Again, we're going back to that death drive, life drive, that desire to live. We feel toxicity as an instinct. Something's not right. That guy on the bus, that guy on the train, he seems off. I'm in danger. This family's off. That child doesn't seem safe. You look at videos of children around Joseph Biden, our president, or Donald Trump. I've given off that vibe, being just my own Shaz weird self, is that you give off a vibe, and then the innocent, the instinctual among us, children are very good about instinct and about recognizing where danger lies, because that's their only defense, right? Until they build up that cognitive ability, instinctually have to tell what's a danger to them, or where their safety lies, who they can trust. And then that's, well, so we instinctually using that, if we're still tapped into that subconscious instinct, and some of us are, especially the sensitive people, feel that the world is going towards a bad place. I've seen it over the last couple of years. People are predicting this war with China that the State Department in America has been pushing. People knew we were going into Iraq, knew we were going into Afghanistan. Yeah. And so what we're going to try to do is pull these subconscious narratives out into the open. Audit the Fed, audit the government, audit where this money's been going. The families for 9/11 have been calling for a new investigation. No one was satisfied with that investigation, not even the 9/11 Commission. I've read those books. The thing about Shaz that you'll realize is anything I say, I'm willing to document if I haven't already. Any work I do, I will present in the open for you to criticize. If I err, tell me but where. And then let us grow in love and wisdom together. Open systems, baby. That's what the internet was based on. That's what the future will be based on if we have a future. But let's dig out of this negativity. We're going to do one day today. We're going to do Monday. And we started this Monday. November 1st, we started. And now it's Friday. I've done all of last week. We're going to do Monday. And then I think Saturday, Sunday, we're going to do Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday. I've been doing this, and I have some other work I'm doing too. A lot of reading and writing. Most of my work is reading and writing. So yeah, we're going to knock out a day. But this was good. It's good 13 minutes. This is what my podcast would be, me talking. But before I talk about my opinions, even though I've documented so much of my life and I've gone back to my writings from high school, we still want to create processes to continue documenting. So for the next month, 2 months, we're going to work on those processes. And then we're going to, if we get the budget, right? When we get the budget, we're going to farm those out to other people to continue documenting reality, while Shaz goes on to put his mental efforts towards the alternative, the new. My name is Shaz. I'm running for the congressional districts, to be determined by the end of December, which one that will be. Ways to help spread the word. Tell someone that, hey, Shaz, I don't know if he's sane. I don't know if he's crazy. I don't know if he's going to succeed. I don't know if he's going to be ignored. But what can we control? That he's not ignored. So tell someone, spread the word. It's a very simple thing to do. I'm trying to be as sincere and unique as possible. So that way, right or wrong, this is something worth watching. Number 2, send me some money. Venmo. If you send me $1, send me your change. I will send you a thank you. If you send me $5, boom, you get the best logo ever created for a political party. What is this? Is this a political party? Is it a federation? I was just thinking yesterday while I was writing, I was like, maybe I'm Moody's. Maybe I am like a rating agency for politicians. So we don't create a political party because the thing about structure is it takes time. They fight us in court. They say, "Oh, you didn't do this right. You didn't get your money right." But what if we create this as some sort of like accrediting agency? Where we have a federation of independents. You can run, anyone can run as an independent. You can run as writing candidate. There's ways to enter the ballot or the election system without having to jump through all the hoops. And then you evade all of the barriers that they put up on purpose to keep independents out. So what if this is just a way to certify independence, saying, hey, if you have the FP logo, if Shaz says you're good, then that means we know your character's good. We know that you're going to abide by these certain ethics. I mean, really, and that's one thing that comes from the instinctual, just when we look at the BS that we've been observing all our lives in politics, whatever country you're in, whatever your engagement, you know that these guys are dirty. Like there's, I just yesterday, I was like, what? The replacement for Cuomo's husband is getting government contracts? That's the best we can do. She's a woman. Yeah, great. But like, why do we always need this cronyism? Why does Joseph Biden have to have his son selling artwork? The art industry has been, it's the easiest way to money launder and embezzle money. And this guy has no history of art. And then now he lived right down the street from me in Venice Beach. It's interesting, right? Biden's son lived a couple blocks from me. Power keeps just touching my life in different ways. That goes into the book, though. So, anyways, send money so I can build this organization, whatever it is, third party accreditation, something. But so we can bring the conversation back to character and values, which is, I think, going to be our greatest leverage, is that we're good people. And just good people. Let's empower good people and disempower bad ones. How do you define good people and character? How do you define character? Look at your words, thoughts, words, and actions. Simplest way to live as a good person is unify your thoughts with your words, with your actions. That's simple to say. It's very hard to do. But yeah, if you are who you think you are, who you say you are, who you do you are, if all of those are unified, people recognize it. There's no bullshit in this person. When he gives me his word, it's right. And when I look at his eyes, I don't see like shadiness, which is more instinctual, right? But how do we tell what is in someone else's head? I don't know. That is a tough one too. Sometimes people don't even know what's in their head, right? That's why I'm inspecting myself and putting it all out there. Tell me what's in my head. Look at Shaz's life. Tell me who he is. And then finally, if you really want to support me, or if you're just interested in the thoughts in my head, reserve my books. The 2 books we're selling right now to get my publishing company off the ground, 10 Bone Press, TENBONEPRESS.com, is Dowdy Shaz, TAOTESHAZZ.com, and Good Barracks, GOODBARICS.com. Zen Buddhist wisdom in order to maintain peace. Because my last time practicing being a politically revolutionary in Occupy Wall Street, I realized everyone is just angry. There's a lot of emotional instability, which has kind of led me on this path, I guess, of realizing that it's emotional manipulation. That's probably like one of the key ways they are keeping us oppressed. Oppression has gone from the physical, and we knew this at the turn of the 20th century when comic books and when TV and the media of motion pictures was first released. People realized how big of a tool it was going to be for emotional manipulation. You have, what is a movie? Screenwriters, Shaz being a writer all his life, trying to break into the writing industry. At one point, I wanted to write scripts, and a movie is a story told with sound and pictures. And they've added a little bit of additional part of the definition and music because scores are so important to movies now. So I think words and pictures. Yeah, words, pictures, and music now. So a movie is a story told with words and pictures. You work on the words, but you also work on the cinematography, and now you work on the music. All of this is to get you emotionally invested in the story, as well as there's a logical coherence, but sometimes there isn't. But it's about taking someone on an emotional journey. To what ends, though, right? To what ends. So yeah, I think whatever we do, we want to make sure that we have a practice for emotionally calming ourselves, or else, no matter how well our intentions are, there could be someone who could step in and emotionally manipulate us. I'm going to take out the gum out of politeness. Let's do this. An hour, and then we're out of here. Shaz goes back to his reading and writing. How are you guys doing? Is everyone having a good day? All of my 1, 2, 3 viewers. How am I going to? How am I going to advertise this? How are you going to get viewers, Shaz? I don't know. No, I'm not thinking about that yet. Right now, Will Smith had a good quote. You wake up, you put down a brick as straight as you can, as carefully as you can. And the next day, you wake up early, work as hard as you can, put down that next brick as straight as you can, carefully as you can. Before you know it, you have a wall, but you don't wake up to build a wall. You just set that one brick as best as you can. So you do whatever you're doing, you execute as best as you can, very carefully. And over time, things add up. So that's what this week we executed a little bit. We have the beginning of something. We're going to nurture it. This is Tuesday. Look, that's why we pay attention to what we're doing. Why is this Tuesday? This shouldn't be Tuesday. Uh-oh. Let me just check to make sure this is technical difficulties. Bum, 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 bum. This is an easy way to check. New York Times, Monday, November 1st. I think the title might just be wrong. Dun, 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 dun. At Climate Talks, Biden will try to sell American leadership. Is that what we have? Yeah, it is. The title was wrong. Oh, Shaz. That's why you do the work that you require of others to make sure that it is being done correctly. You don't want to be that manager who's like, do this, and you have no idea how to do it yourself, because then you're asking other people to be the manager. U.S. military condemns. Yep, this is right. All right. And also, I've noticed a pattern. Monday is usually the lightest news day in the New York Times, and that's what this looks like. So it's going to be about an hour. So this will probably be an hour and a half podcast total because I talked a lot, but it's good. Every now and then, all of this talking before the news is just practice for my eventual podcast. If this grows, if it grows. Okay. Reading the Times for Monday, November 1st, 2021. At Climate Talks, Biden will try to sell American leadership to skeptics. President Biden will walk into a Riverside event space on Monday to try to convince a gathering of world leaders that the United States, which has pumped more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere than any other nation, is finally serious about addressing climate change and that others should follow its lead. But Mr. Biden is coming with a weaker hand than he had hoped. Mr. Biden has made climate action a central theme of his presidency, winning praise from diplomats and other leaders who expressed relief after former President Donald J. Trump had scoffed at climate science and had withdrawn the United States from global efforts to address the crises. Climate Forward, a new administration, an ongoing climate emergency, and a ton of news. That sentence shouldn't have been in there. The U.S. has had to be dragged kicking and screaming to the climate table and has slowed down action that was needed to tackle the climate crisis, said Mohammed Adao, director of PowerShift Africa, a Nairobi-based environmental think tank. At least 85% of the planet's population has already begun to experience the effects of climate change, according to research published by the journal Nature Climate Change. Clearly, we are in a climate emergency. Clearly, we need to address it. Patricia Espinosa, head of the UN Climate Agency, said Sunday as she welcomed delegates to Glasgow. U.S. military jury condemns terrorist torture and urges clemency. In a stark rebuke of the torture carried out by the CIA after the September 11th attack, seven senior military officers who heard graphic descriptions last week of the brutal treatment of a terrorist while in the agency's custody wrote a letter calling it a stain on the moral fiber of America. The officers, all but one member of an 8-member jury, condemned the U.S. government's conduct in a clemency letter on behalf of Majid Khan, a suburban Baltimore high school graduate turned Qaeda courier. At the behest of Mr. Khan's lawyer, they then took the prerogative available in military justice of writing a letter to a senior official who will review the case, urging clemency. The clemency letter also condemned the legal framework that held Mr. Khan without charge for 9 years and denied him access to a lawyer for the first four and a half, as complete disregard for the foundational concepts upon which the Constitution was founded, and an affront to American values and concepts of justice. The letter was drafted in the deliberation room, recommending clemency for Majid Khan. In closing arguments, Mr. Khan's military lawyer, Major Michael J. Linus of the Army asked the panel for a minimum sentence and then to consider drafting a letter recommending clemency. INC Moses, a former Marine who is a civilian lawyer on Mr. Khan's defense team, called the letter an extraordinary rebuke. Part of what makes the clemency letter so powerful is that, given the jury member's seniority, it stands to reason that their military careers have been impacted in direct and likely personal ways by the past 2 decades of war, he said. Their letter noted that Mr. Khan, who never attained U.S. citizenship, was held as an alien, unprivileged enemy belligerent, a status that made him eligible for trial by military commission and not technically afforded the rights of a U.S. citizen. But the officers noted Mr. Khan pleaded guilty, owned his actions, and expressed remorse for the impact of the victims and their families. Clemency is recommended. Sentencing was delayed for nearly a decade after his guilty plea to give Mr. Khan time and opportunity to cooperate with federal and military prosecutors so far behind the scenes in federal and military terrorism cases. BIPOC or POC, equality or equity, the debate over language on the left. Gender neutral terms like Latinx for people of Latin American descent, they, them pronouns that refer to single person and birthing parent or pregnant people instead of mother to be inclusive of trans people are also gaining traction. Some activists defend the focus on language, saying that the way people use words is not mere symbolism, but is necessary to achieving justice. Saying something like black people are less likely to get a loan from the bank instead of saying banks are less likely to give loans to black people might feel like it's just me wording it differently. Rashad Robinson, president of the racial justice organization Color of Change, said, rather than language that tries to guilt people into action, he said he wishes the message was white people too suffer from living in a society in which racial injustice and inequities persist. Many of the words surfacing today in today's language debates are not new. One reason BIPOC has engendered both backlash and bewilderment, says Nicole Holliday, a linguist at the University of Pennsylvania, is because it seems to be an example of top-down language reform. Widely shared over social media last year, its champions have said it is intended to emphasize the severity of racial injustice on Black and Indigenous people. Compared to 18 months ago, the term systemic racism is being used across the board, whether people are talking about it or denying its existence, said historian Ibram X. Kendi, whose book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, has been widely read. For Nancy McDonald Ladd, a white senior minister at a Unitarian church in Bethesda, Maryland, that is made up of mostly white progressives, the fixation with language stems at least partly from a sincere desire to reorient one's worldview. Why paid family leave's demise this time could fuel it later. Fundamentally, to provide paid leave, you have to value women and value their work. Miss Gillibrand lamented, and valuing women and their work is a hard thing for the United States. The last minute removal of the paid leave program underscored long-standing questions about how it can be that while 186 other countries have such a program, the United States does not. Because corporations run our country, dumbass. White House officials say 95% of the lowest wage workers lack any paid leave, and they are predominantly women, people of color. Ms. Gillibrand said that optimally, a stable, generous family and medical leave plan would be an earned benefit like Social Security and Medicare. Workers would pay into the system and claim the benefit when they needed it, regardless of where they worked or how much they earned. The House proposal would have guaranteed 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave annually to all workers in private or government employment. Gig work like Uber and Lyft, or self-employment. Democrats offered to scale back a 12-week leave plan for 4 weeks, then to limit it to leave for new babies, not medical emergencies. It's an issue we need to address as a nation and look at and get creative with, said Senator Shelley Moore Capito, a Republican of West Virginia, who helped secure paid leave for federal workers. Both parties await results in Virginia and what it bodes for the battles ahead. The last 2.5 months make it look like Democrats are in disarray, said Representative Philemon Villa, a Texas Democrat who had raised money for Mr. McAuliffe. Because Mr. Biden carried the state by 10 points last year, and Mr. McAuliffe began the race with an advantage befitting the former governor he is, the most significant implications in Virginia are for Democrats. The party is also haunted by recent history. Their loss in the 2009 Virginia governor's race, the last time Democrats controlled the White House and both chambers of Congress, foreshadowed the party's electoral wipeout the following year. A close race in Virginia would signal just how hard the midterms will be for Democrats and urgency of passing democracy reform, said Waleed Shahid, a spokesman for the left-wing Justice Democrats who grew up in Virginia. Progressives were already unenthusiastic about Mr. McAuliffe, a fixture of the party's establishment and former National Democratic chairman, and they have been irritated that he did not do more this year to help the party's state lawmakers hold on to its majority they won in the House of Delegates in 2019. Wow, so this guy who lost was the chair of the Democratic. It just gets deeper. The closer you look at life, it just gets more spicy. Whatever, one of the reasons I read this is also to read it myself. So while I'm reading it, sometimes I don't want to comment too much, but I'm like, Shaz, this is interesting. The when I'm doing it, I'm not really looking at it. And then now when I'm reading it, I pass over this information 2 or 3 times. So this is like the second or third time me reading it out loud. And then I'm going to pass over it one more time when I synthesize it in a weekly review. So that way, if you don't want to watch hours of Shaz talking, a half an hour to an hour, you'll get the whole week's news. I'm trying to provide tools to help you better understand your reality faster. That's the main goal. Where were we at? Progressives didn't like McAuliffe because he was a fixture of the party establishment. Surprise, surprise. Whatever happens Tuesday, one lesson we already know from Virginia is that we better prioritize winning state legislators like our democracy depends on it, because it does, said Daniel Squadron, who runs the States Project, which is dedicated to electing Democrats in state houses. Oh, I think we're going to do something similar then, huh? Angling for a merry fishmas despite global shipping delays. On October 13th, the same day that Catchco was waiting for its calendars to clear the port, Mr. Biden announced that Port of Los Angeles and companies like FedEx and Walmart would move toward around-the-clock operations, joining the Port of Long Beach, where one terminal has begun staying open 24 hours just weeks before. A global container shortage kept the calendars idling at the Chinese port for a month, awaiting for a box to be shipped. On September 1st, nearly 3 weeks after setting sail across the Pacific Ocean, the vessel anchored off the coast of Southern California, alongside 119 other ships vying to unload. 2 weeks later, Catchco's containers were off the ship, where they descended into the maze of boxes at the Port of Long Beach. It's going to be an ongoing dynamic until we have full control of the virus. That's before us. In the past, Catchco would often ship products from the West Coast ports by rail. Longer travel times on rail lines, as well as high demand for containers at Chinese ports, mean shipping companies have been loath to let their containers stray too far from the ocean. Mr. Mr. Mack said he believes supply chain difficulties may ease next year as ports, rails, and trucking companies gradually work through their backlogs. Afghan art flourished for 20 years. Can it survive the new Taliban regime? Taliban believe art is a path to corruption and vice in society, said Samullah Nabipur, the former dean of Fine Arts School at Kabul University. The Taliban have rejected this, saying that the government will not oppose art as long as it doesn't violate Islamic law. Who are the Taliban? Oh, I need to stop including that. There's little slides that they include in every single Taliban article. Who are the Taliban? Let the New York Times tell you what you should believe. Right. Anyways, we'll dig into that. What any other sentences in here that aren't repeated? The roots of art dried up when the Taliban came to power in the 1990s, said Roya Sadat, an award-winning Afghan filmmaker. He brokered apartheid's end. Can he save South Africa's Liberation Party? The motorcade of black luxury vehicle. Even the luxury vehicles have to be black. Everything's about race, right? Carrying President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, rumbled through the narrow township streets, swerving around potholes filled with stale water from backed up drainage ditches, and stopped near the concrete shell of an unfinished government-supplied house. Mr. Ramaphosa had come to Tembisa, a township about 30 minutes northeast of Johannesburg, ahead of local elections, to sell residents on all that his party, the African National Congress, had supposedly done to improve their lives. 2 decades later, Mr. Ramaphosa outmaneuvered his predecessor, Jacob Zuma, to win control of the governing African National Congress. And the country, Mr. Ramaphosa has and the country. Mr. Ramaphosa has risen above critics within the party and embraced the whole people, said Sile Zakalala, the premier and top ANC official in KwaZulu-Natal, Mr. Zuma's home province. According to an Afrobarometer survey, 64% of the public believes corruption has increased over the past year, despite Mr. Ramaphosa's pledge to clean up after Mr. Zuma. So if you don't want the ANC, who will you put in power who can give you electricity? Mr. Ramaphosa said. Maybe he asked. Mr. Ramaphosa asked. I speak so fast, I don't even look at these words sometimes. Japan, I looked at my this first week of review. I'm doing a lot of meta-analysis today. I was like, am I speaking too fast? Am I speaking too slow? So somewhere in between, I think. And this, I think it's a foot and a half. A foot to a foot and a half is where it should be. Japan's election was closer than usual, even though party in power has hit snooze button. Now comes Fumio Kishida, who was chosen as prime minister last month by the governing Liberal Democrats and led the party to victory on Sunday in a closer than usual parliamentary election. In anointing Mr. Kishida, 64, last month, the Liberal Democrats passed over both an outspoken maverick who is popular with the public and a far-right nationalist who would have been Japan's first female leader. Mr. Kishida said that the results showed that the electorate had given the Liberal Democrats a very precious credence. As a slightly less stodgy leader than his predecessors, Yoshihide Suga, Mr. Kishida is still frequently described as boring by the Japanese media and struggles to connect with the public. Or I don't think people are going to call Shaz boring. I'll be many things, but not boring. Or even his supporters and friends. Some civil servants in the foreign ministry gave him the nickname Chihuahua, referring to him behind his back as a well-mannered type of dog. And General Nakatani, a former defense minister who has known Mr. Kishida for 30 years, one lawmaker whom Mr. Kishida met in college and described as one of his best friends, went on to back a rival, Taro Kono, in the Liberal Democrats' recent leadership election. Mr. Kishida once hosted a birthday party for his Russian counterpart and presented him with a bottle of Suntory Hibiki 21 whiskey, which retails for about $750. When Japanese whiskey is actually pretty good. It is. You Japanese, anything you put your mind to, you excel at. When Caroline Kennedy was the American ambassador in Tokyo, Mr. Kishida gave her t-shirts, aprons, and mugs imprinted with photos or cartoons of her face. My recommendation for Japanese whiskey, if you don't want to spend $750, some of their blended, so like their single, I don't know the terminology, but single source, single barrel, single whatever. But when it's aged and like super fancy, it's expensive, but some of their blends are pretty good too. Japan's election was closer than usual. No, we already did that. Stay on task, Shaz. Once a leading polluter, the UK is now trying to lead on climate change. A lot of things need to happen to keep the lights on. Britain is not just the host of the climate meeting known as COP26. It has a credible claim to being a global leader in climate policy. A birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, Britain has become the first country to legally mandate reductions in greenhouse gas emissions through the Climate Change Act in 2008. There's even a proposal for a new coal field in Cumbria, northwest England, which would seem to cut against Britain's climate aspirations. While BP, Shell, and other energy giants lobby the government to keep burning gas, there's no analogy in Britain to Senator Joe Manchin III, the West Virginia Democrat with financial ties to the coal industry, who pressured the Biden administration to water down core elements of its climate agenda. In 2006, the British government advisor Nicholas Stern produced a seminal study of the economic effects of climate change, which framed the debate before the 2009 summit in Copenhagen and set the stage for the Climate Act, passed under a Labour Prime Minister, Gordon Brown. Parliament created a climate change committee, which prodded the government to adopt policies that would help Britain meet its goal. Struggling at home, Biden is buoyed by G20 trip abroad. Since President Biden took office 9 months ago, the United States has imposed sweeping new sanctions on Russia, continued to arm and train Ukraine's military, and threatened retaliatory cyber attacks against Russian targets. The official noted that Russia had been closely aligned with the United States on restoring the Iran nuclear deal, and to a lesser degree, dealing with North Korea, but acknowledged that there were many other areas where the Russians tried to throw a wrench into the works. Biden Mr. Biden's measured approach has earned plaudits in Russia's foreign policy establishment, which views the White House's increased engagement as a sign that America is newly prepared to make deals. The most important thing that Biden understands is that he won't change Russia. Russia is the way it is. For the White House, the talks are a way to. Anyways, we're going to deal with this narrative end of the week. For the White House, the talks are a way to head off geopolitical surprises that could derail Mr. Biden's priorities, competition with China, and a domestic agenda facing myriad challenges. Microsoft's disclosure of a new campaign to get into its cloud services and infiltrate thousands of American government, corporation, and think tanks networks made clear that Russia was ignoring the sanctions Mr. Biden issued after the SolarWinds hack in January. Miss Newland's conversation in Moscow were described as wide-ranging, but in the flurry of talks between the United States and Russia, there are clear areas the Kremlin does not want to discuss. Russia's crackdown on dissent and the treatment of the imprisoned opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, have gone largely unaddressed, despite the disapproval that Mr. Biden voiced on the matter this year. While Mr. Biden will not see Mr. Putin in person at the Group of 20 summit in Rome or at the Glasgow Climate Summit, Dmitry S. Peskov, Mr. Putin's spokesman, said in October that another meeting this year, in one format or another, between the two presidents was quite realistic. Foreign Ministry Sergei V. Lavrov said on Sunday that he had spoken briefly with Mr. Biden at home and that the president stressed his commitment to further contacts. Mr. Biden has been very successful in his signaling toward Russia, said Kadri Leak, a Russian specialist at the European Council on Foreign Relations in Berlin. G20 agree to new limits on coal-burning power plants. Wait, no, we missed one. Did I miss one? See, Shaz, you got to slow your roll. We did UK pollution. We did that one, so we missed this one. I need a bigger computer. Struggling at home, Biden is buoyed by G20 trip abroad. President Biden capped off a long week of diplomacy on Sunday with a swaggering proclamation of America's renewed force on the world stage, claiming credit for what he cast as a breakthrough on climate change, tax avoidance, and Iran's nuclear ambitions at the end of a Group 20 summit that was missing some of his biggest global adversaries. The summit in Rome brought a larger group of leaders together, though some of Mr. Biden's largest rivals on the world stage, like China's Xi Jinping and Russia's Vladimir Putin, stayed home. Mr. Biden has hour-long meetings at the summit with leaders of various influence. Mr. Biden said there were two big agreements. No, said there were no substitute for looking someone straight in the eye when you're trying to get something done. Biden hails two big agreements at COP26 and scolds Russia and China. Mr. Biden conceded the irony in another push he made at the summit for oil and gas producing countries to ramp up production to push down driving and heating costs at a time when he is also urging the world to turn away from fossil fuels. Mr. Biden did not agree to allow Mr. Erdogan to purchase F 16 fighter jets to update his fleet with money it had already spent for F 35s. But as his news conference wound down, the engagement Mr. Biden lingered on longest was the one that kicked off his trip, meeting with Pope Francis. Why is Catholicism having a global stage at these meetings? The religion, right? Who are the religious fundamentalists? Didn't we have a stop commenting, Shaz? G20 nations agreed to new limits on coal burning power plant. On Sunday, leaders from the G20, who today represent the world's biggest coal producers and consumers, agreed to take the first steps to weaken coal's future, though they fell far short of what is necessary to sufficiently address climate change. In a joint communique released at the end of their summit in Rome, the G20 leaders said they would end the financing of coal power plants overseas. But the statement included no new commitments to curbing the use of coal domestically. We must accelerate the phasing out of coal and invest more in renewable energy. Moving the world's biggest economies away from coal by 2030 is vital to reaching the 1.5-degree target, analysts say. China consumes more coal than any other country and has stepped up coal power production in recent weeks. In the wake of electricity shortages, the G20 statement did pledge to end the practice of financing coal power plants in foreign countries, which in recent years has been a way for countries including Japan, South Korea, and China to sell coal power infrastructure to developing nations. The necessity of coal phase out challenge has now been elevated all the way to G20 leaders, but it is evident that some are still resisting agreeing to explicit language on coal. Chris Littlecott, who follows coal for E3G, a London-based research group, said on Twitter, all these groups, there's all these NGOs and groups, and what's your opinion? Well, it comes from this think tank. Okay, let's include it. In Texas, abortion law case, a spotlight on Brett Kavanaugh. The most likely candidate, legal experts say, is Justice Kavanaugh, who has come to wield enormous power. As the justice at the court's ideological center shares some of the Chief Justice's concerns for protecting the institutional authority of the court and is sensitive to public opinion. Over his Supreme Court career, which began in 2018 after a bruising and partisan confirmation fight, Justice Kavanaugh has been in the majority 87% of the time in divided decisions and argued cases, beating the career record of all justices appointed since 1937. Chief Justice Roberts is a principled, independent, and inspiring leader for the American judiciary. Justice Kavanaugh said, in divided decisions in argued cases, last term, the two men voted together 91% of the time, the highest rate of agreement among pairs of justices, one tied only by two members of the court's liberal ring, Justice Stephen G. Breyer and Sonia Sotomayor. The negative reactions to the September 1st decision probably did surprise some of the justices in the majority, Professor Baum said, so that one or more of them felt a need to dispel the perception that they were responding to challenges to this Texas law in a cavalier way that simply reflected their attitudes toward abortion. Where does that leave Justice Kavanaugh? He is, for starters, the member of the court most likely to acknowledge the power on the other side's argument. There is an interest in ensuring women's access to healthcare and preventative services, which is also a critical interest, dissenting last year from a decision protecting LGBT workers from employment discrimination. Justice Kavanaugh said that the result was required by the text of the relevant statute. One dead after dozens try to swim around San Diego border fence. One woman died and 36 people were detained after as many as 70 people tried to swim around a fence that juts into the Pacific Ocean at the border of the United States and Mexico, the authorities said on Saturday. The group attempted to swim from Tijuana into Borderfield State Park in San Diego late Friday evening, the Border Patrol's parent agency, Customs and Border Protection, said in a statement. Border Patrol agents called paramedics after discovering an unresponsive woman who is believed to have been part of the group of swimmers. The Coast Guard, who dispatched two cutters and a search helicopter, took 13 people from the water and handed them over to Border Patrol, said Adam Stanton, a Coast Guard spokesman. This section of border fence that extends about 300 feet into the Pacific Ocean is one of the most closely watched ports of the 1,900-mile border. In the last 12 months, the United States has recorded most illegal border crossings since record keeping began in 1960. In the last 12 months, we've had the most illegal border crossings ever. That's the desperation of the world. Manhattan's next likely DA questions police over Eric Garner's death. Mr. Bragg, the Democratic nominee for Manhattan District Attorney, who is heavily favored to win the office in the general election on Tuesday, has for the last several years represented the family of Mr. Garner as they have continued to seek details about the lead up to his killing that day, an event that brought urgent attention to the way that black men are policed in New York City and around the country. Bragg has worked in law enforcement for most of his career and worked productively with police, holding people accountable and thinking about issues systemically does not necessarily put one at odds with the police department. Mr. Bragg, 48, is a former federal prosecutor who also worked at the New York State Attorney General's office when he rose to become Chief Deputy Attorney General. Eugene O'Donnell, a professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and former police officer, said in an interview that both prosecutors and the police had been more politicized in recent years, a dynamic that can stoke tensions, but that police would respect a judicious approach from Mr. Bragg. Mr. Bragg has made his own fraught encounters with the police a foundational part of his campaign narrative, and police accountability is at the heart of his resume. Upon taking office as a district attorney, Mr. Bragg plans to establish a police integrity unit that will report directly to him, siloed off from the rest of the office to avoid any conflict with other bureaus. Mr. Bragg did not grandstand or otherwise draw attention to himself during the judicial inquiry this week, as he questioned Lieutenant Christopher Bannon, the police commander who, after being told of Mr. Garner's death via text message, said that it was not a big deal. Still, Mr. Bragg fought to nail down every last detail, asking a number of questions about a meeting at which the police department discussed cracking down on the illegal sale of cigarettes and the protocol of filling out a memo book. I'm just going to look up Christopher Brennan, Lieutenant Christopher. Every now and then I do this because I'll forget. Lieutenant Christopher Brennan. Who was that again? What was his name? Nat Garner. Death. Not a big deal. I didn't hear about this before. Supervising officer. Okay, got it. Just getting a sense of who this is. Sounds like a dirtbag, right? In the rural West, some residents are taking firefighting into their own hands. Miss Linville is one of the growing number of Americans across the rural West who are taking fire management into their own hands, buying surplus fire trucks, construction rigs, and converted military vehicles online to protect their homes and land. Deputy Chief Nick Schuler, a spokesman for Cal Fire, California's firefighting agency, put it starkly. A person who has a gun and can fly a helicopter doesn't make them trained for war. And just because a civilian is able to buy a fire engine does not make them properly trained to utilize it. Marin County Fire Battalion Chief Graham Groneman advises residents to invest in home gardening, the process of modifying a home so it's more fire resistant and defensible space rather than heavy machinery. We're going to try to get enough stuff built out so that if we have a fire around here, we can go and put it out and not have to wait on the agencies. In some remote parts of the West, an alternative model to firefighting has gained popularity. State officials are training and equipping local community members to fight fire. We know the land, and it makes all the sense in the world that we would be the ones fighting the fire out here, said Miss Linville, who started her career for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and maintained her annual wildfire training for a decade. Though through a contract with fire agencies, he would allow them to use his vehicles and he would work the fires well. Firebreakers, his company, consults on fire risks and clears shrubs, brush, and other fuels surrounding homes. In this article, you'll notice as I iterate this idea, take the news, summarize it into a manageable form, and then give it to you in a written, auditable way, and then also an auditory way. We were auditory before we were readers. So, podcast and the verbal transmission of information will always be a priority because also we're busy. You put this on in the background while you're working. A buddy of mine said he listens to me on his way to work. So this has hope, but like in this article right here, you can see that the sentences aren't following because since it is a crude summary, we're talking about Miss Linville who started her career, and then it says through a contract with fire agencies he would. So now it's a different person. So the pronouns aren't aligning, and then the last sentence doesn't align because it's just basically taking the sentences in the article and just chopping them up. So I need more sophisticated tools. This is a very crude tool, but it works. It's just something I cobbled together. In the final days, but that's why when you hear me talking, sometimes it won't make complete sense, but you'll get the gist of what the article is about. In the final days before Virginia votes, both sides claim momentum. High stakes race for governor of Virginia entered its final stretch with Glenn Youngkin and Terry McAuliffe trading accusations of sowing division as voters appeared closely divided over returning a Democrat to office or electing a Republican to lead their state for the first time in more than a decade. Mr. Youngkin, the Republican candidate, greeted crowds of more than 1,000, while Mr. McAuliffe, the Democrat, hustled through sparsely attended events from morning to night. I'm a Hillary Biden voter, Glenn Miller, a lawyer from McLean and frequent donor to both parties, said as he walked into a Youngkin rally in southern Fairfax County on Saturday night and drew more than 1,000 people. There are a lot of people like me who are annoyed, he said, and added that he was able to vote for Mr. Youngkin because he did not associate him as a Trump Republican. The McAuliffe campaign has tried to portray Mr. Youngkin as a Trump acolyte, accusing him of exaggerating fears that children are being divided by race by teachers who are encouraging them to see white people as inherently bad. That's literally what's happening, though. He's got parents fighting parents and parents fighting each other, Mr. McAuliffe said over the weekend. Miss Torres held a Youngkin yard sign and a handful of stickers that read Latinos for Youngkin. The couple said they both voted for Mr. Trump, but also for Mr. Obama. Why a pilot is under investigation for saying, "Let's go, Brandon." The phrase, "Let's go, Brandon," which is understood to be code word for swearing at President Biden. Who understands this? You modern kids and your slang. Was uttered over the intercom by a Southwest pilot during the flight on Friday. A reporter for the Associated Press wrote in an article about the spread of the phrase. Others pledged their support to Southwest because of the pilot's remark. Southwest Airlines apologized to customers on Sunday and said it was conducting an internal investigation. The viral moment began in early October at a NASCAR race. Are you trying to make this a thing? But anyways, this is like the Streisand effect, right? The more attention you give to this, the more it's going to become a thing. At a NASCAR rally in Alabama that was broadcast on NBC, as a crowd appeared to be cheering on the driver, Brandon Brown, an NBC reporter interviewing Mr. Brown suggested that people were chanting, "Let's go, Brandon," but it became clear they were actually saying a four-letter expletive and then Joe Biden. Since then, the phrase has exploded in popularity. Lawmakers, musicians, and former President Trump's campaign, PAC, have all used it with a joking tone. Twitter users who called for a boycott of Southwest said the airline should punish the pilot, Karen North, a professor of digital media at the University of Southern California, who worked for the Clinton administration, said that a moment like the Brandon phrase has the fun of being an inside joke or meme and the power of being a rallying cry at the same time. But these moments seem to have an ever shorter shelf life, Miss North said. We'll see how many articles the New York Times gets out of it, right? How New Yorkers can help shape voting rules and environmental rights. The ballot question include measures involving legislative redistricting, changes to voting laws, environmental policy, and New York City's civil courts. Registered voters can weigh in on the proposals by casting ballots during early voting, which runs through Sunday, or on Election Day, Tuesday, November 2nd. The proposal's opponents, including the League of Women Voters of New York State, have focused on this point, saying that allowing a simple majority to make such decisions could diminish a minority party's voting power. A push to allow same day voter registration. A push to allow same day voter registration. The measure, one of two ballot proposals relating to voter rights, would eliminate a rule that requires voters to register at least 10 days before an election. The measure would be particularly beneficial to voters who do not start paying attention to local politics until late in the election cycle, said Jan Combo Piano. What a beautiful last name. Combo Piano. It's like two pianos, but you put them together. It's a combo piano. The senior policy director for the Brooklyn Voters Alliance. Under current law, mail in ballots are only allowed for voters who expect to be away on election day or who have an illness or disability that would prevent them from voting in person. I have to check my messages because sometimes the space is needed. There's positivity and nice people. He's good. Boom. All right. The places in New York City where Republicans still stand a chance. In the final days of the fall campaign, Republicans are working to change that in the 40th Council District of Brooklyn, which is home to many Orthodox Jews and Russian and Ukrainian immigrants. The Republican candidates in New York's competitive race differ from one another in tone, experience, and local issues that reflect their distinctive districts. Some Republicans even argue that the challenging national environment that Democrats appear to be facing may be evident in a handful of city races, too. At the city council level, Republican hopes boil down to a matter of margins. The most optimistic Republican assessment, barring extraordinary developments, is that they could increase their presence by five from three on the 51 seat city council, as they did in 2009. David Carr, Mr. Mateo's chief of staff, is a Republican nominee. Sal F. Albanese, once a Brooklyn city councilman who has run unsuccessfully for mayor several times, is a Democratic nominee. George Wanika, a real estate agent, is running on the conservative party line. Ex-officer who tried to hire a hitman to kill her husband is sentenced. Miss Cincinnati started dating Mr. DeRubba in she tried to rub out DeRubba in around 2017 court filings show. In letters filed with the court in advance of sentencing, Miss Sinelli's friends and family members said they were suspicious of Mr. DeRubba, who they described as a con artist, who claimed to be a former FBI agent. They said he was possessive and manipulative. In recorded conversations from May 2019, played in court Friday, Mr. DeRubba and Miss Cincinnati discussed his concerns about being questioned by law enforcement after the deaths. An FBI agent posing as a hitman sent Mr. DeRubba a photograph of the supposed crime scene, in which he showed to Miss Cincinnati. According to court filings, Miss Cincinnati contacted Mr. DeRubba to get their alibis in order and told him to delete their text conversations from his phone, prosecutors said. That doesn't save you. At sentencing, prosecutors sought to dispel Miss Cincinnati's contention that Mr. DeRubba had manipulated her, saying she had repeatedly pushed him to complete the murders. Endangered California condors can reproduce asexually, study finds. Before the findings made public on Thursday, the other known instances of parthenogenesis among birds were limited to turkeys, finches, and domestic pigeons, according to the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. Parthenogenesis, we're going to go with that, is considered to be a rare phenomenon in birds, said Oliver Ryder, co-author of the study and director of the conservation genetics at the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. The species, which in 2020 numbered 504 birds, has been closely monitored and studied for decades, leading to discoveries like the one published Thursday, said Samantha Wisely, a conservation geneticist at the University of Florida, who is not involved in the study. In 2013, Dr. Ryder's team noticed some discrepancies in the database, which prompted a reanalysis of all the birds in captivity. Because of the bird's genetic makeup, female condors reproducing on their own can give birth only to male condors. According to Dr. Ryder, the discovery of virgin births in such closely monitored bird population is leading scientists to wonder whether more birds in the wild are reproducing through parthenogenesis than previously believed. Careful, you're about to have a whole bird religion. We know how that thing works. Facing up to the racist legacy of America's immigration laws. From the beginning, the United States was built on the dual foundation of open immigration for whites from Northern Europe and racial subordination and exclusion of enslaved people from Africa, Native Americas, and eventually immigrants from other parts of the world. In response, the United States passed the first significant national restrictions on free immigration. The Page Act of 1875 prohibited the entry of Asian women, and Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 barred all Chinese immigrants. The Immigration Act of 1924 further cut the total number of immigrants allowed in each year and made permanent strict quotas in order to favor immigrants from Northern and Western Europe. Beginning in late 1800s, immigration line riders, known as mounted guards or Chinese inspectors, rode through border towns checking the documents of Chinese immigrants. In the longer term, the 75% of Americans who believe that the United States is a nation of immigrants needs to grapple with the fact that for most of the country's history, its laws meant that only white immigrants could come. Do Americans still believe we are a nation of immigrants? If we do and truly want to live up to that ideal, then more barriers to immigration should come down, and explicit and implicit racial favoritism of those we do let in must end. Metaverse? Are you kidding me? All right, this is an opinion, so we could do this guy's voice. What is this metaverse? See, Shaz, look at this is what happens when you have too much coffee. We're good. All right. What is this metaverse, you may ask? The New York Times explains Mr. Zuckerberg painted a picture of the metaverse as a clean, well-lit virtual world, entering with virtual and augmented reality hardware at first and more advanced body sensors later on, in which people can play virtual games, attend virtual concerts, go shopping for virtual goods, collect virtual art, hang out with each other, with each other's virtual avatars, and attend virtual work meetings. That sounds absolutely ridiculous. After carefully curating the people, institutions, and outlets that I follow, I now encounter more information that I could ever have imagined. More information than I can process. Oh, this guy's on to what I'm trying to do, help you process information. Social media is another publishing platform, and as a person who produces content that is published, social media was another outlet for me. Keeping up with and connecting with friends and family have never been easier. Although I must admit that the most valuable and meaningful social networks to me at the moment are simple text groups to write more things that I don't immediately share. I want to share more pictures with people that I love and who love me, not with the world to get the world to react. I mean, but shouldn't we be sharing more love with the world because they're trying to get us to like fight so much? What Taiwan really wants. Military provocations are rising. Record number of Chinese warplanes have crossed into Taiwan's air defense zone in recent weeks, a stark reminder of Beijing's desire to absorb Taiwan. Whether Biden simply misspoke or was signaling his resolve to China. The suggestion of a shift to strategic clarity prompted a cautious response from Taiwan. The president's office cautioned Taiwan would not rashly advance when it received support. Taiwan's president, Tsai Ing wen, called for maintaining it as it in her recent National Day address, saying, "We will do our utmost to prevent the status quo from being unilaterally altered." While status quo for Taiwan is not a static idea, while status quo for Taiwan is not a static idea, the broad contours of Chinese, US, and Taiwanese policy roughly define what has been acceptable as the status quo. China doesn't relinquish its claim to Taiwan, and other countries avoid recognizing Taiwan as a sovereign state, instead pursuing informal relations with it. The United States, the United States sells Taiwan arms for self-defense and does not clarify whether the United States will defend Taiwan if China invades. Helping Taiwan require understanding. Helping Taiwan requires understanding the history and political aspirations of the people of Taiwan. But no comment. Will Glasgow be the climate breakthrough we need? Developing countries were exempted, including China, even though its emissions had already begun to rise steeply. A new American administration under Barack Obama failed to pull the countries of the world into common cause. Britain, which is hosting the conference, is cajoling the world's countries to go big. Yes, the pledges are still too weak. Countries are not on track to meet or even their weak pledges, and the world is collectively a long way from where it needs to be. Rich countries promised $100 billion a year in aid for poor countries to cope with the climate emergency, and they have failed to deliver the full sum. If emissions can fall in dozens of countries, as they have, they can eventually fall in all countries. Attacks on tenure in Georgia and beyond. Tenure protects the academic freedom of tenured faculty, providing a structure in which faculty members can research and teach new ideas without fear of political or social retaliation. Tenured track faculty comprise less than 10% of all research and instructional faculty nationwide, and this trend away from hiring tenured track faculty has been happening for decades. Even without the new Georgia policy, universities are already subverting tenure. Non-tenured track faculty teach, conduct research, and perform service for universities. While we fully support protecting the academic freedom of tenured faculty in Georgia, collectively the Academy should protect academic freedom and provide fair working conditions for all faculty across the Academy. The Georgia Board of Regents' new rules permitting tenured professors in the public university system to be removed with little or no faculty input is a mistake. Under Georgia's new policy, a tenured professor's performance would be evaluated by the additional benchmark of student success. But how would student success be measured? The number of students who pass or end up with A's in your class? Glowing student evaluations, the real measure of a teacher's worth, is how hard she works to address her students' needs. China's popular electric vehicles have put Europe's automakers on notice. MG is an example of how Chinese car makers are exploiting the shift to electric cars to challenge the American, European, and Japanese car makers that have long dominated the industry. The Chinese automakers are arriving as electric cars surge in popularity, accounting for almost 10% of new car sales in Western Europe. And consumers are in a mood to buy with savings built up during the pandemic. Foreign automakers like Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, or General Motors sell millions of cars in China, so they can hardly complain when Chinese automakers encroach on their turf. Sales of electric cars, the technology the Chinese are emphasizing, have doubled since 2020 in Europe, despite a slump in overall market. Unclear is whether fussy European buyers will buy a Chinese car. While the market may be ripe for Chinese electric cars, the political timing may not be so ideal. Learning to live with Mark Zuckerberg. As the battle between tech companies and the news media continues, Mr. Zuckerberg appears to be acting on the view, increasingly common in his circle, that journalists are just another hostile interest. Mr. Lesson has a unique vantage on Mr. Zuckerberg and on the tensions between tech and the news media. Not Mr. Lesson. I'm sorry, Miss Lesson. Miss Lesson dates the hostility between journalists and Silicon Valley to the rise in the mid 2010s of Uber, whose leaders treated the worst features of tech culture, arrogance, and misogyny among them, as features, not bugs, and faced a new kind of adversarial coverage for it. I'm kind of baffled by it. Miss Lesson's second observation is that many tech chief executives see themselves in a battle with news outlets for its hearts and minds of their own employees. Tech executives are completely associating their employees' activism with media outlets. And then there's Twitter, where up and coming tech executives like the Coinbase chief executive, Brian Armstrong, take inane shots at the news media for industry kudos, and journalists show off one another by mocking tech bros. Both journalists and tech executives are guilty of thinking Twitter is more important than it is. Miss Lesson said, the tech giants haven't exactly withered under the news media scrutiny either. A major Persian Gulf oil producer tries to burnish its climate credentials. Mr. Al Jabbar, who heads Abu Dhabi's national oil company, which provides about 3% of the world's oil, has another job, apparently, in the United Arab Emirates, a federation of 7 states, including Abu Dhabi, whose oil production bankrolls the other 6. Make no mistake, Abu Dhabi's leadership wants to preserve a market for the Emirates' enormous oil reserves, which are enough for more than 60 years' output at current rates. The Emirates produce about 3 million barrels of oil a day, most through the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, or ADNOC. That revenue underwrites much of the country's economy, financing the government and helping support downtowns, futuristic office towers in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. Last Saturday, at a conference in Riyadh, officials in Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil exporter and frequent rival to the United Arab Emirates, said it would commit to achieve net zero by 2060. In a signal that the oil giant is prepared to adapt to climate needs, ADNOC recently announced that it would join with BP, the British oil company, to build facilities in Britain and the Emirates for producing large volumes of hydrogen, the clean burning fuel that could be used in the future to power truck fleets or make steel. Banks tried to kill crypto and failed. Now they're embracing it slowly. Digital currencies, which let individuals bypass banks in money transfers, sales, and business collections by connecting people instantly without an intermediary, are threatening to take away the central role banks play. Last year, engineers at the Bank of America filed the biggest number of patent applications in the bank's history, including hundreds involving digital payment technologies. It's unclear how exactly the bank plans to use its technology, but it was partly driven by the desire to keep customers within the bank's system, rather than lose them to scrappy cryptocurrency startups that allow them to transfer money free. Bank of New York Mellon and Northern Trust are working on offering custodial services to their clients, essentially bank accounts for other banks that would hold Bitcoin. Bank lobbyists are pushing regulators hard for uniform rules around cryptocurrency focused lenders and other companies that transfer money and other services similar to banking, arguing that unless they are subjected to the same controls banks face, the newer businesses will enjoy an unfair advantage. The American Bankers Associations, which represent the largest U.S. banks, warned members of the House Financial Service Committee this past summer that the negative consequences of creating a central bank digital currency could be severe. The association said there did not seem to be a pressing need for one because the dollar is largely digital today. Mr. Cohen, senior chairman of law firm Sullivan and Cromwell, who years earlier warned New York regulators of Bitcoin, is among those pushing for greater regulation. Google and Facebook's ad empires. There's vigorous public debate about the benefits and serious trade offs of the digital worlds that Google and Facebook create. Alphabet, the corporate entity that includes Google, made about 80% of its revenue last year from the ads we see when we search the web, watching YouTube videos, checking out Google Maps, and more. It's not breaking news that Google and Facebook are souped up versions of old school advertising mediums like newspapers or radio. If you type Miami vacations into Google, that's a blaring signal that you might be interested in booking a hotel room. If hotels can pay an average of $1 per new customer from its website to show up prominently in those Google search results, versus $2 for each customer if it buys a television commercial. Those hotel rooms might be cheaper for us. To sell ads, Google and Facebook normalize the data arms race to collect as much information about us as possible. And now the bank, grocery store, and weather apps are grubbing every detail they can to sell their own ads. To protest Iran's anti gay abuses, an artist painted a dictator's car. Mr. Shojain relished the opportunity to bring attention to his community's plight, but had to shift media to create an art car. Mr. Wallace, a longtime figure in Republican politics, is also head of a group called United Against Nuclear Iran. The car, painted by the artist Alireza Shojain, depicts two Iranian men who were killed, one by the government and one by family members. Advocating for LGBTQ rights in Iran is a notable thing, said Nahid Siamdost, assistant professor of media and Middle East studies at the University of Texas, Austin. You should judge us for what we are doing. We should be criticized for having a car that stands for advocating. We should be criticized for having a car that stands for advocating against the mistreatment of gay people in Iran? Question mark. And that's a conservative principle? Question mark. That's absurd. Regardless of the controversy, Mr. Shojain sees great merit in bringing attention to the issue. Whoever is doing anything for LGBT rights in Iran, I really appreciate that because I totally understand how difficult that is. He said, mentioning activists and organizations working from exile in Iran, such as Six Rain. American Airlines canceled more than 1,200 flights over the weekend. American Airlines canceled more than 1,200 flights over the weekend, blaming bad weather and staffing shortages for widespread disruption. The cancellation represented more than 12% of the airline scheduled flights for Saturday and Sunday, it said, and came just weeks after Southwest Airlines was forced to cancel nearly 2,000 flights. To make sure we are taking care of our customers and providing scheduling certainty for our crews, we have adjusted our operations for the last few days this month by proactively canceling some flights, Mr. Seymour said. We're taking this measure to minimize any inconvenience as much as possible. Most of the customers impacted by these changes are being rebooked the same day, and we apologize for having made these changes. Airlines have struggled with brief but significant disruptions since the spring as travel resurgence collided with ambitious but tight flight schedules, bad weather, and limited staffing after tens of thousands of workers took buyout or early retirement packages during the pandemic. Mr. Seymour said that in his notes that the airline was confident that it was prepared for the busy holiday period, with nearly 1,800 flight attendants returning from pandemic leave on Monday, and even more returning on December 1st. The airline is also hiring flight attendants, pilots, and airplane maintenance technicians as it gets ready for an expected return to pre-pandemic levels of passenger travel next year. This may be Democrats' best chance to lower prescription drugs. Several Democratic lawmakers remain skeptical of policies that might hurt the drug companies or stymie future drug development. Revlimid has become so identified with high drug prices that the House Oversight Committee last year called in Mark Allies, the CEO of Celgene, which developed the drug. Revlimid costs Medicare and its patients more than $4.7 billion a year, the second highest cost of any drug in the program. The Congressional Budget Office estimated that a drug price system like the one passed by the Democratic House in 2019 would mean about 8 fewer new drugs over the next decade, and 30 fewer drugs in the decade after that. Very few patients pay the full price of drugs, but insurance plans increasingly ask patients to pay a percentage of the drug's price instead of a flat fee. Even the drug companies want to limit how much patients can be asked to pay, in part because it would increase the market for their drugs by making sure more patients fill the prescriptions. How should billionaires be taxed? The short window when a billionaire tax was part of the Democrats' spending package stoked the long running debate about whether a special tax on extreme wealth is fair or even constitutional. The proposed tax raised questions about how a tax aimed at unique features of billionaires' wealth would work if or when lawmakers revisited the issue. Such a tax is hard to avoid because it directly targets corporate stock in publicly traded companies, and such data is already reported, said Emmanuel Says, an economics professor at the University of California, Berkeley, who studies tax policy and inequality. In a way, billionaire tax addresses this problem, since capital gains would be taxed when they occur, regardless of when an asset is passed between generations. Supporters of efforts like the billionaire tax say these tweaks to the existing rules wouldn't preclude also introducing a new tax on the wealthiest Americans. We have to look at any tax policy in an ecosystem because one tax alone will always have its own limitations and potential side effects, Mr. Collins said. Roblox goes down, forcing children outside for Halloween. Roblox, the gaming platform that is widely popular among children, especially those from 9 to 12 years old, were knocked off long, were knocked, was knocked offline starting Thursday afternoon. Attempts to use the website resulted only in a message. We're making things more awesome. Be back soon. On Sunday morning, Roblox's official Twitter account wrote that the company had identified the root cause and solution and was working to restore the platform. Turns out, Roblox down. A Roblox spokesman referred to the company's tweets but did not comment further. Roblox tweeted on Friday that the outage was not related to any specific experiences or partnerships on the platform. In the meantime, parents were left to cope with stressed out children. In the meantime, parents were left to parenting. Your whole life is Roblox. That's all you know. You live, eat, breathe Roblox. So all of a sudden, when it's taken out of your routine, it's a little bit stressful. In Bethesda, Maryland, 13-year-old Garvey Mortley was also trying to find a way to fill the time. This sounds like addiction. You're allowing kids to be addicted to video games. Garvey's mother, Amber Coleman Mortley, this is withdrawal from addiction. Oh my gosh. Says she was using the outage as an opportunity to teach Garvey about how companies' problems can affect their stock. Roblox went company in March and the ripple effects these issues can have on people. New York Times. A dangerous legal battle over vaccine mandates will continue. In concurring opinions, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who was joined by Justice Brett Kavanaugh, argued that the court should not consider the claims on an emergency basis, without benefit of full briefing and oral argument. 3 justices dissented, arguing that Maine's failure to provide a religious exemption violated the First Amendment's protection for the free exercise of religion. The court explained there are manifold restraints to which every person is necessarily subject for the common good. On any other basis, organized society could not exist with safety to its members. Less than two decades later, in 1922 ruling Zucht versus King, the Supreme Court cited the Jacobson decision to affirm a San Antonio law requiring the vaccination of school children, even in the absence of an outbreak. According to the court, because the city's foster care contract said that agencies cannot reject foster or adoptive parents based on sexual orientation unless exception is granted, the city allowed for exemption and therefore had to offer the Catholic agency one for religious purposes. In the main case, Jane Doe 1 through 6 versus Mills, the Court of Appeals for the First Circuit emphasized the distinction between medical and religious exemptions and refused to block Maine's vaccine mandate for healthcare workers, which did not offer religious exemptions. In contrast, in early October, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit found that Western Michigan University's refusal to grant religious exemptions to student athletes was most likely unconstitutional because the mandate allowed for medical exemptions. More worrisome, a decision by the Supreme Court that rejects its own precedent on vaccine mandates and ignores the distinctions between medical exemptions and religious exemptions will reverberate far beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. And that has been Reading the Times for Monday, November 1st, 2021. Reading the Times for Monday, November 1st, 2021. It is 1 hour, 29 minutes. We hit that 1 hour and 30-minute mark. To all my 0 viewers, thank you so much for watching. This has been good. I think we have something here. Let us move on to week 2. Usually I'm not going to do this on the weekend because Shaz needs to work on other stuff as well. This is labor intensive, mental intensive, but But yeah, this weekend I'm going to catch up. So we're going to do 2 more tomorrow, 2 more Sunday. Hopefully, there's some good fights on Saturday, including Canelo and the UFC. So, but we're going to fit this in. This is important. This is a beginning. Years for the revolution. Shaz Barbaric, signing off.